So thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Emily with Rally Point Title Agency, and we have these monthly webinars really geared towards our real estate agent partners for just to provide information to help you better serve your clients. At the end of the day, it's all about service, what we can bring to our clients, and our goal is to help you gain more information, knowledge, and little things you can take away. So each month we do these. Some are a little bit closer to an hour, depending on the topic and how in depth we go. I know we did one a couple of months back that was with AI. That one was pretty lengthy. For today's purposes, it's really going to be closer to about 30 minutes. And then if you have any questions throughout, just feel free to drop them in the chat. And then there'll be a couple minutes at the end. We can get through some of those. So today's topic is really closing the deal, mastering title, settlement, and closing day. So I'm going to speak to you about closing from the title agent's perspective, right? So that's really what I can speak to today. And I am going to give you some information about title and settlement. Closing day, of course, like towards the end, but if you can take at least one thing away from today's webinar that will help you better educate your buyers and sellers, that's really the goal that I want to get through. So I'll start with, you know what, where is my, oh, I just got to click. Okay, there we go. So I want to just briefly give you an intro of who you're talking to today. So my name is Emily Robinson. I'm the owner of Rally Point Title Agency. We serve New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Florida. I've been in title for about 13, 14 years now, really from a processing perspective. So I started working for a real estate attorney as a paralegal who also owned a title company, and then sort of segued into this processing role of title insurance. And that's really where I think I was able to see a lot of the pitfalls that happen within the title industry, whether that's between title and realtor, title and attorney, or all the professional parties that are really working together. I live in Old Bridge, Middlesex County here in New Jersey. I have 2 kids, and I'm really just going to dive in, but I wanted to give you a brief introduction of who you're talking to today. Okay, so just some main points of what I'm going to go through is the what, why, how of title, how it affects closing, how to be proactive about it, common title issues, things you can expect if you have a deal that has certain items. For example, I'll say bankruptcy, divorce, things that might delay a closing, examples, settlement. And then you can't really talk about settlement and closing without mentioning fraud, which is a huge thing in our industry. And I'm sure you've all heard it multiple times. So I am going to touch on that a little bit at the end. And so with that, we'll just dive in. Okay, so the idea of today's webinar is really mastering the closing experience, right? All of our referrals and recommendations from existing customers are really the most powerful way to grow your business. I think it goes without saying, I'm sure all of you can attest to this, the best referrals and clients you've had are from past clients that have introduced you then to their friends, family, whatever it might be. It's a warmer introduction. It's usually a better referral, and we all want to grow a referral-based business. So the question becomes, how do we do that? Buyers and sellers are always going to remember the closing experience. So they may not remember, right? There's that saying that they may not remember what you say specifically, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And working in sort of a behind the scenes sort of role in title, you were kind of able to see the things that sort of made or could kind of make or break closing day. So everybody's sitting around the table. At that point, all of the issues should be out of the way, right? So how do we do that? And really, it comes down to the basic idea of mastering closing is about being proactive and communicating. And I say it all the time. And in this industry, it's it's pretty amazing just how much that doesn't happen between parties. So what are the things we can do ahead of time or in the beginning stages or in those beginning conversations with our clients to prevent that breakdown in communication? And with that, everything at the end of the day, they remember closing, they remember you, they remember the team that they worked with, they remember the people that were sitting at the table with them. And that's what they go and tell their friends and family about. And it just adds to this referral-based business that we want to create. So, and we do that by going beyond, right? So, and I've mentioned this, so some of you on the call, we did a lunch and learn, and I had mentioned this before, the book Raving Fans. It's one of my favorites, and it really breaks down the idea of going beyond the expectations of just having a satisfied customer. Satisfied customers are just not good enough anymore. We want to create fans of our business that are essentially becoming advocates for our business. So they're the ones endorsing you. They're the ones giving that referral that's more than just, yeah, I used Joe, I used him before. It's more explaining the experience that they had, why it was so wonderful. So you're sort of creating these advocates that are explaining why they should use you. And then it just kind of snowballs from there. So, and the way we do this, and I have a slide for this at the end, but the first step is really continued learning. I really believe that this has worked for our business, is continuing to learn and grab pieces of knowledge throughout the way helps us better serve our clients. So it's where I'm going to start today is, again, from the title agent's perspective and how certain things in title, knowing them or even knowing what to listen for, will allow you to be more proactive to create the closing you want to for your clients. Okay, so on one of our past webinars, we talked about marketing and social media content. So why does that relate to a title slide here, right? So my point is that on that webinar, one of my takeaways from it was the website. It's called answerthepublic.com. And I found it very fascinating and a really great tool to figure out very quickly what people are asking on Google, on the internet, about your business. So whether you put in New Jersey real estate, title insurance, whatever it is. So I did that here, and like, what do people want to know about title? What are the very general basics that can be useful to somebody in a closing? So it's answerthepublic.com. That's just my side note of getting an idea of what people want to know. And so when you put in title insurance, I get, what is it? Why do you need it? And how much does it cost? So those are the first three things I'm going to just go through quickly here. And, you know, my point is just for you to understand what it is, why you need it, because in the beginning, buyers don't really know anything about title. So when you get all the way to the end and it's a surprise, hey, you need title, or hey, this is how much it costs, an informed and prepared buyer is always going to be a happier, less stressed person to work with. So if we can get these things out of the way in the beginning is really key. So basically, what is it, right? Protects owners or lenders against any title defects in real estate. In the most basic terms, it covers against lost legal costs to defend any claims or the right to ownership. So in comparison to a title or insurance policy that you would get for a car or a house, where you're insuring the future of what may potentially go wrong, or an accident that happens, or something in your house. Title is insuring the past. So your seller's items, your liens, mortgages, things like that. Not only do we go out and search the records to try and find the information, but it's also about making sure it's settled prior to closing. So when you have a buyer that's really foggy on what it is, you can really just break it down that, you know, it's ensuring the past to make sure they have clear ownership in the most basic way. How do we do that, right? Was the second part. So we're searching county, state, municipalities, things like that, to look for these items: recorded deeds, mortgages, judgments, And then you have different types of transactions, estates, foreclosures, things like that. So these are just some bullet points of the documents we're finding to put in the report. I could probably spend a separate webinar on each one of these. But my purpose in mentioning them is because when you have a listing or a buyer, but either way, sometimes even more so on the listing side, finding out if they have judgments or if there is an estate that maybe they, like their parents died or whatever relative passed away, have they done the necessary probate documents or taken those steps, things like that, chanceries, foreclosures. So, and I'm sure you have a way of pulling this information out of your buyers and sellers or asking them the questions in the beginning. But the more questions you can ask in the beginning, the smoother the closing day is going to be. The faster you get there. It's kind of really all about getting ahead. And I really do believe in being proactive about these things. So for instance, a divorced client, right? They may have judgments versus their ex-spouse that they may not even know about. And just so you know too, a judgment search, if you have a straightforward sort of listing, it's, very cookie cutter sort of transaction, maybe you don't need a judgment search. But if you have someone who's like, I'm not sure, I think I got something in the mail like 3 years ago and I didn't pay it. A judgment search is $20. It's $20 per name in the state. It's not a big expense and it can really alleviate waiting until the end to find out. So something like that, you don't want to wait. You do the title search and it comes back, but let's say ahead of time, you can kind of get the ball rolling on the documents you need for those things rather than waiting to the end. And I find that the more you can do that in the beginning, a lot easier closing day is, or it's less of a chance for it to be delayed, which is really the goal. I find that the closer you get to closing, the more stressed out the buyers and sellers are, the more items that come up. It just creates a different sort of feel for closing. So that's the whole point of getting ahead of it. Surrogates and estates is a huge one, and so is foreclosure. So if you have maybe a divorced client, an estate, a foreclosure, those are good situations to really nail down a lot of the specific questions to them, or you can run basic searches that aren't that costly to sort of get a better idea of where they have to go from there. So the next question was why. So covers protection for buyers and lenders. It adds security for your buyer. And we're resolving issues before closing, which is the big one. We want to resolve them before your buyer takes the property. And then protects against hidden defects. And we see that sometimes when I say hidden, it's mostly like estate issues. There might be some long lost heir that someone's not aware of or comes back and tries to say they have ownership, things like that. That's what title does. Okay, so I'm gonna just go through some common issues that we see when we do the title. Incorrect legal descriptions, mistakes in recording. Unpaid taxes is a big one, especially with estates. People don't know that they may have had to pay inheritance tax. And this is something on the listing side, if you have an estate sale, if they did probate, great. But if they didn't, you kind of know where to start. Like you have need to refer them to an estate attorney. And this is where resources in your team really come into play also. Having good people to refer them to for these things. But I've had files where they did not realize that they even owed inheritance tax. And it can be a lot of money depending on how much the estate is worth. It could be tens of thousands, 50,000, whatever it is. So if someone thinks that their proceeds are going to be a certain amount, it could be completely different once you factor in these taxes. So those things are really important to note first. If it's an estate sale and you say, okay, are you the sibling, the daughter, the niece, the nephew, right? Because certain beneficiaries have different classes. And if they're in a different class, they're going to owe inheritance tax over if they were just a child or a parent or a spouse. So it's it can be kind of complicated. And so maybe it would even change if they wanted to sell or not, knowing they had to pay a lot of tax. Open mortgages that are actually paid off. This is probably the most common one. Somebody had a mortgage, let's say in 1997, and they paid it off and since refinanced years later, but nobody actually discharged that mortgage from 1997. Those are probably some of the most common things we find. And then outstanding rights not of record. Okay, we had a file recently. They were neighboring properties and shared a driveway, and the neighbor is actually the one that owned the driveway. It showed up in a survey. So even though they shared a driveway, there really was no recorded right for that person to use the driveway, which was a great thing that they had a survey, because we wouldn't have known otherwise. So what the seller had to do was go to his neighbor and get an easement and things like that recorded all before the new buyer was going to buy. And that took a lot of time. Maybe 2 months or so that whole thing took. But the risk there would be if the buyer just bought the property with the understanding that they can share the driveway, and then later on, maybe the neighbor moves or they don't get along and they don't want him to use the driveway anymore. So getting those issues out of the way beforehand was key to this guy even wanting the property. So there's several things I think in your conversations with like buyers and sellers, like I said a few minutes ago, that will kind of have the potential, I'll say, to delay a closing. Judgments, of course, and I get this a lot with lenders. On a refi with judgments affect all real property. So if it's an investor and he doesn't necessarily live there, that's fine. But that doesn't mean the judgment doesn't attach because he doesn't live there. Or on the judgment itself, it has his home address, but yet he owns, 5 other investment properties he wants to sell. It's all real property with his name on it. Now, if it's in an LLC or things like that, it may not attach. But it will if it has the name. So we had one recently, and the argument was from I think it was the mortgage company, that the address wasn't on the mortgage, but it didn't have to be. So just so if you're listing one house and somebody has judgments and other properties and things like that, it's going to affect all of them. It's not necessarily just one because that's the one, that's listed there. Foreclosures, depending on the type of foreclosure, that would definitely be a reason that could delay closing. If it's an REO or a sheriff's sale, it's not usually too bad. 5 or 10 years ago, those sort of reports would take a couple weeks to come back. Now it's a couple of days. So that's gotten a lot better. Estates, I think if you ever have an estate sale, my first question from thinking in my title lane would be if they've gone through probate. Because if you list the house and then it gets under contract and realize that they didn't, which an attorney at this point would be going through all of that anyway, would just really delay the whole thing. It could take weeks, months if they haven't done the estate stuff. Surveys and tidelands. Surveys and tidelands, I think, are pretty big categories that can really kind of spend an hour on each of them. But there are buyers that don't want to get a survey because of the cost, right? It can be anywhere from, let's say if it's a residential property, maybe it's from like $700 to $1,000, right? So it's not nothing. There is a cost to it, and some buyers might not want it just to save money, but there are, I know a lot of attorneys will recommend it. And if they don't get a survey, usually there's a waiver. But it can really pose pretty significant issues if you close and then there ends up being something that you would have wanted the seller to take care of. And then tidelands, same thing. Tidelands can be a really big game changer in closing, because if you have a listing, my advice would be, if you have a listing that's waterfront or the back of the house has a dock or is on a river or whatever, just get a tideland search. It's a $30 search, comes back in about a day. And you can tell right there if it's claimed or not, and if the appropriate grants have been filed. I had an an attorney call before they even, I think they were in attorney review, and he knew the property was tidelands. And he was like, can you do this title order sort of early? I know it's tidelands. We already talked to like the DEP about it and all these things. And it probably saved like 2 or 3 weeks to the closing date, because we had all of that before we even really did the title report. So otherwise it would have taken, a week for title, and then our examiner would see it, and then it would sort of come to me and we'd look at it, and it would take time. So at the end of the day, the best closings are the ones that you're getting in front of the issues. And the only way to do that is to really educate yourself on the potential issues that could exist. And these are just some of those ways. So I'm going to give you quickly two examples, one on a survey, one on tidelands, which are pretty extreme because not all surveys are going to look like this. But this was one that probably took us about over a month to work through. So if you're in Monmouth County, maybe this looks familiar. You have Shrewsbury River and Shrewsbury Avenue. You can see this survey is where we're looking. I'll use my mouse here. Is the red line. The red line is everything that this person's deed described. So this red dotted line, which this is what his deed described he should own. That was passed through the deed chain from whoever the seller bought it from. But you can see this red line goes all the way over here. Then it goes across the road and then onto the adjacent building, the adjacent property, right? Which is pretty long. He's got like a driveway over here somewhere. So clearly the surveyor went out there and was like, well, this guy owns the road and part of the adjacent neighbor, which is just wrong. It was done improperly. Whoever did this survey years ago did not described something that is not actually that they own. They don't own the road. So this was a big issue. They had to go to the town, figure out why there's no right of way recorded for this North Street here. They went to the neighbor, had to get copies of his surveys to show what he owned. At the end of the day, they fixed it, and this buyer actually got this pink line here, which makes sense, goes here. But this would not have been found if they didn't do a survey, right? They could have found out years later when they go to sell the property, and then at that point, their sale would have been hung up. So the purpose of title and surveys and why we review them is to really prevent these issues from happening to your buyer in the future. And sometimes these a title issue for a buyer might not come up for years later. And the title insurance policy is really supposed to prevent that. And then I give you a quick example of tideland. So if you have a waterfront listing or it's on the water somehow and it has a dock, I really recommend doing the tideland search just so you know if it's claimed or not. Or if it is, that's fine, as long as it has the proper grants recorded. But you can find out pretty quickly if it's claimed or not. And tidelands really refers to, New Jersey is the only state that has this, but New Jersey owns rights to the water or lands that was formerly flowed by the tide, right? So I'm showing you this property. It's in Jersey City. It's a condo building. This whole thing is a condo building. And it's 100% claimed. So the yellow area is claimed tidelands, which means the state of New Jersey technically owns it and then issues grants and permits, licenses, one of the three, to give the owner access to that property. So apparently this property was at one time water, maybe it was 100 years ago, but the map hasn't changed. And this whole area is claimed, right? This came up a week before closing. So clearly this was delayed, maybe not too long because it was worked out, but several weeks because the attorneys had to look at it. The buyers had to understand what they were buying. As long as the proper things are filed by the state, there's no issue. But had they kind of known ahead of time, they probably could have actually closed on time. So those are just two key points, I think, that for surveys and especially waterfront property, it's a good idea to sort of get in front of those. Okay, the last thing I want to mention is the cost, right? All the time we get the question, what's the cost? We get buyers want to know, they might not want to know in the beginning when you're trying to explain that they're going to need to buy title. But when they're working through their estimates, especially with their lender, they're going to see a breakdown of title fees, and they're all state mandated, and they have to be disclosed item by item. So it looks like on a closing disclosure, there's like 17 title fees. If you have to generally estimate for a buyer, you can give them the estimate that I mentioned here. Very pretty general though, like less than 500,000, it's about 1% of the purchase price. Sometimes a little bit less. Over 500, the percentage actually tiers downward. So you get closer to a 0.5%. So like on $1 million property, it's not $10,000. It's more like 5, maybe like high 4s, maybe 5 or so. But that's just a very general way to say it in the conversation with the buyer. Well, what's title? How much does it cost? You can kind of go off of this if you're just spitballing off the top of your head. I also put an image here on our website under resources. You can use the rate calculator. If you have someone that wants to be, really wants to fine tune the number or that they're going to have to pay, it's in that calculator, which is right on our website. And then you can also do on the same tab on our website under resources, they also have we also have like a seller net sheet or a buyer breakdown. If you have numbers like your lender numbers and things, you can put them in there. But sometimes if you want to just get a quick title number to give buyers a good idea, you can use that calculator. And I mean, the happiest buyers we have are the buyers that are informed and they know what they're doing. They know what they're signing. Their expectations have pretty much been set realistically for closing. And cost is one of the things definitely that comes up. So in preparing for closing, it really comes down to the simplest forms of communication. And as the real estate agent, one of the best things you can do is sort of put together your own team per client. So you have different types of transactions, whether they're a married couple or a first-time home buyer, divorcing, whatever it is. And building those resources of referral partners is really the key to getting through a good closing. Everybody's familiar, everybody knows what they're doing. You have the ability to reach out to them and stay in touch or be like, hey, did you call so-and-so? Knowing everybody involved is really the best way you can prepare, and then make sure everybody's on the same page, whether it's through email or phone or whatever you're doing. So making sure everybody's in touch, an obvious number one. Preparing the buyer and for closing costs. So you do that in the beginning through, you're going to have to pay title, you're going to have to pay attorney, lender, whatever it is. If you have a homeowners association, I think a lot of times a day or two before closing, and this does come up when they get their final CDs, sometimes they're a little surprised at the HOA costs. So for them to understand in the beginning what the monthly fee might be, but also it's not always about the monthly fee. They have membership fees, capital contribution, and some HOAs are really high compared to others. I know one here in Monmouth County in Freehold, they charge, I think $400 or $500 just to get the statement. So that's not even, for anything else that goes towards the HOA. It's just so that they can put the letter together to say how much the seller is going to owe or how much the buyer is going to owe. They charge like $450 for it. And
Emily, excuse me, is that a one-time fee?
Usually getting the statement, yes, is a one-time fee. But you have HOAs that, some don't charge anything. You email them a letter and you say, we're closing in a week, and they send it to you. And then other ones won't even send it to you until you pay that fee. So I know the one I'm thinking of is Association Advisors in Freehold. If you've ever worked with them, they manage a bunch of HOAs, and it's, it's often a surprise. So, just finding out those little things up front at least sets the expectation. But understanding how the funds are going to be sent. So this comes up a lot also. How am I sending my funds? Do you take a check? Do you take a wire? Things like that. So knowing the protocol for the attorney office or whoever's closing, the title company. I know with us, we sent out a letter in the beginning when we do the title report that details how the buyer should come to closing. It says if they want to send a check, this is how you do it. If they want to come with a wire, this is our procedure. This is how you should verify it. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it still goes till a day or two before closing and they don't realize, but getting ahead of those or knowing them, right, is key, because then the buyer's not as nervous. They're not as stressed. There's less drama. It's sort of pulling out as much drama is really the common theme here. And then a realistic timeline of closing figures. Realistically, as much as it would be nice to give, buyers their final numbers, a week or two before closing, it's really usually happening a day or two before closing. By the time the lender clears the file or you have taxes or different things, even depending on where you are, like in the quarter, or if they've paid their HOA and things like that. All those things are really not updated until a day or two before closing. So realistically, they're going to get estimates along the way. Their mortgage broker is going to be in touch and say and provide them with preliminary figures. But buyers should know that the real number is going to change from their estimate, and it's probably not going to be provided for like maybe 2 days is probably good. Every now and then it's a day before, but they're just things that I think we see fairly often are the main things that you can prepare somebody on. So I can't really talk about closing without mentioning wire fraud. It's everywhere. I'm sure you see webinars and postings online. Everybody's talking about it. And, unfortunately, the criminals are just as smart as the scholars here. So you have to know upfront the company's funding procedures, whether that's through your attorney, the title company, whatever it is. Just ask the question so that you can tell the buyers or sellers or whoever. And I've seen a couple of agents do this before, circulating like the team information to the client pretty early, whether that be in like a Word document or you hand it to them in a folder. And it's like, here's the people we have on your transaction. And maybe this happens like during attorney review so that they have like sort of a hard copy of who they're going to call. And it just kind of alleviates the worry over them getting a hack email. So they might get an email which is everywhere. The hack emails, fake emails, they have to look at the recipient. It could say email from Emily Robinson, but then when you look at the email address, it says like, Emily at like 123 bunch of weird letters.com, and it's a fake email. So instead of putting that onto your buyer also like, hey, of course, watch your emails, but giving them an upfront contact sheet would be like, when you get something, when you get a wire instruction, whatever, use the numbers I've given you to not base them off your email. Just creates another like layer of a checkpoint. They should be calling both title and attorney when talking about the wire. Educating them, right? I mean, there's so many buyers we have not in our industry, right? You have working with teachers, different professions, doctors, whatever, like they don't see it as mainstream as we do. But I have seen, several instances, people sending money to the wrong place, or they, we have one, or I've seen one where I think they sent it to who they thought was the title company or closing agent, but it was like 70,000, and I don't believe they ever got it back. And you don't want that to be your buyer. So keeping that front and center, at least informing them, is a big thing, because we talk about the experience they have at closing. They will never forget that one if they lost money. So key components of when I think of getting ahead of closing, being proactive, like how do we make the happiest buyers and sellers, right, that we can have to refer us business in the future, is the team you're surrounding your buyers and sellers with. And as the real estate agent, you're really in the position of these initial conversations with these buyers and sellers, because they're sort of dissecting why they're going to sell, why they're going to buy, or what their current situation is or isn't. And if you're, you kind of have it in how you're forming your questions to them, and pulling out the information of who you think would be the right fit for them. And I put that here too. It's, our industry is a little bit of a matchmaker position too. Like we see someone, maybe they are like, obviously a divorcing client may not be the right fit for an attorney that specializes in short sales, right? Maybe they need somebody who is more on the divorce side, or estates, or things like that. And the same with like lenders, or maybe they have terrible credit and you have somebody that can really help with that. And you're sort of putting together these teams that are really going to help them. So building your own professional networks with familiar, reliable professional parties is one of the best ways you're going to create this raving fan, right? And I put it here last, the number 4, getting ahead of the issues. The more you can sort of train yourself and educate yourself on these other things that could potentially hold up a closing, or could potentially affect their experience and their closing with you, you have the ability to get ahead of it. And if you don't know the answer, we all don't have the answers to everything, right? But we can build networks between each other of at least who does, or where to go for those answers. Okay, so I'm going to kind of close it to here, where I listed what, and again, in the beginning, I said, mastering closing from the title agent perspective. This is really what I see and what I believe has really helped our business flourish. How to master closing and really give your clients the best experience is to continue learning. The more you learn and educate yourself on different things, even if it's a little bit of title here, a little bit of lender knowledge there, and so on, you're going to be able to better serve your clients, or you're going to hear things in the conversation that might raise questions or concerns, or sort of put you in a position to help them in a certain way that you may not have realized before. Like, oh, hey, that's an issue. And we just do that by learning from each other, things like that. Building your professional teams and resources is really key between the parties involved. And I really just talked about that one. And then listening, right? Listening and asking questions. Listen, ask questions, and the two things, number 1 and 2, kind of fall into place to be able to get them to the right people. Being reactive, and number 4 is where I believe in closing, at least for me, was in different title companies I worked at. There are there are situations where I don't understand why, because I think we should all be proactive, and that's how we're going to create better service. But it was a reactive approach. It was, okay, we're closing tomorrow. Let me go get the file and see what we need. When it should really be the opposite, right? It's like, we're going to close in 30 days from now. Let's work backwards and get ahead of all the other things and create a timeline for those things. Communicating, preparing really goes without saying. And if you do 1 through 5, you're automatically going to exceed the customer satisfaction and create a fan. And I think at the end of the day, we're all in a position to create advocates for our business. And we do that by all of these other things we do in the beginning, that at the end of the day, at closing, they're referring you to their friends and family. So, and this was the book that I mentioned. That's where the concept comes from. If you're a reader or you have it on Audible or something, I highly recommend it, because it's quick, it's easy to understand. It gives examples of different businesses and how they were able to sort of take that one step beyond. Okay. And